All right. Hi.
Hi. Hi, everyone. It's Katie and
Alana. Hi, guys. We're excited. We thought it would be a good opportunity to go through some of the amazing pieces for our art licensing portfolio builder challenge prompts that we've been doing and sort of walk through some of them and talk about ways we think they could be stronger or things we really love about them and hopefully give you guys some pointers along the way.
yeah, there have been some really awesome submissions. We love how active everybody's been, and we're trying to comment as much as possible, but we figured this would be a good way to make sure we get some input on even more people. So,
Yeah. So we picked a couple that had some common themes. So things we were noticing with several pieces and there was no rhyme or reason. We just picked a couple that we saw and we'll share them now. We'll walk through. We'll just spend a couple minutes walking through them and giving some pointers.
okay. So let me share my desktop here. So beautiful. Okay, so let's just dive right into this. And
Sounds
also,
great.
my Christmas tree is still there. Don't judge me.
The
Okay,
no judgment zone.
so we're going to start with this lovely piece by Alessandra Silaus. Sorry if I butcher your names, as I'm going
We'll
to.
definitely butcher the names.
Okay, so I definitely saw a lot of people commenting on.
Wait, Katie, can you click all of them and do it in preview so it's full screen?
Oh, open with preview. Wait,
I
click
think
all
if
of
you click
them?
all of them, then we can go through all of them in order.
Open with
Yeah.
preview. Technology. Oh, you're so smart. Okay,
That loud clanking in the background is just the dog's nails on the floor. No big deal.
no big. Okay, so this piece, I saw a lot of people commenting on the lovely lettering style. That
Yeah.
so the personality of it is really lovely. One of the main things that I noticed about this piece is just that the composition feels a little bit unbalanced because there's the red kind of leading your eye at a diagonal through the piece. And while those flourishes are, I think, Alessandra's attempt to sort of balance those things, they're not as dark or as eye-catching or as heavy as the I'm and the you. So I think this piece just could benefit a little bit better from either maybe centering the I'm and the you or making those flourishes stand out more so that they kind of create more of a
Yeah.
balance.
Absolutely. I think the dimension on this piece is really nice. The delicate nature of the flourish is really beautiful, but it just it feels a little off balance and those things could really help.
Yeah, and just a tiny little thing on the S of so. I just be careful when you're doing dimensional lettering. Like sometimes the serifs can get really close and kind of close in the letter form. So I'm just getting some tension right here between this bottom part of the serif
Yeah.
and the spine here of the S. So and sometimes you're building these letters and they're fine until you add the dimensionality, so just make
Totally.
sure to compensate for that after you get
Yeah. I think the
those
spine could
issues.
just shift down a little bit and there'd be a little bit more breathing room.
Yeah, and also Alessandra is on a roll, so we also
Yeah.
pulled this piece from Alessandra, happy birthday you weirdo. um, one I actually sat and tried to think about this for a while because I was trying to decide if the "you weirdo" was coming across enough for me, and I get that there's aliens and space and abductions and those things are kind of weird, but it's kind of a couple of steps that you have to take to mentally like get to the weirdness of it. So if
Hmm.
there was something a little more strange happening in the image, maybe, that would help. Or if it was like happy birthday Earthling or something like
Yeah.
that,
That'd be a
maybe
good
that would
one.
help with the message a little bit better.
Yeah, and another thing that I noticed, which I think Katie and I saw it differently, was that to me, from far away, I saw this as a birthday hat. And so I think if it was maybe just not off kilter the way it is, maybe it's a little more centered, then, or maybe if it's more off kilter, I'm not totally sure. I'd want to see them. It might feel less like a birthday hat, but that also could have been the intention, which is pretty clever.
Yeah, I think it just is a little bit too subtle on all fronts.
Yeah.
So just
Yeah, maybe the UFO is
exaggerating
bigger.
some of the things, making the weirdness come across more if that's the way you want to go.
Yeah.
And then the readability, the legibility on the birthday is a little tricky, which is hard because birthday is such a long word. And usually we have to fit it on a vertical card. So I always run into issues with fitting
Hmm.
birthday on there. And you're making it, even a smaller area that you're trying to fit it into. So um, that can be a little tricky. Maybe
Yeah.
widen that beam that's coming down.
Sure. And I think this sort of really popular brush calligraphy style, it can be really tough because it can be so playful. So you can fit it into these weird shapes, these really non-traditional shapes, but it also just legibility is always at the forefront. And so I think there are just a couple things, maybe making sure the thick and thins are the same so it's consistent throughout. Right here, the most important word is weirdo. And so like Katie said, just trying to kind of balance the whole piece out a little bit would really help. I actually really love the sky and the little
Yeah.
silhouette. It's really soft and it feels very realistic, even though, I know I'm looking at a drawn card, but it's very soft and delicate. So I think you could easily match that maybe with the text.
Yeah. A lot of great ingredients by
A lot of great
Alessandra.
ingredients and such a range from your first piece.
Yeah, for
Like,
real.
wow, those are so different. And that really shows that you, are pushing yourself and trying new things and have a variety of things in your toolbox.
Yep. Let's go
Which
ahead
we
and
like
move
to
on
see.
to this piece by Christina MacArthur. I don't think
Cool.
I could have messed up that name. um, yeah, the main thing here that stood out to both Alana and I was that the lettering is just kind of falling into the background. It's kind of muddied by that gray. I don't know, is that a surface of a planet or what that is? But there's not enough contrast to make the lettering stand out and be readable.
Yeah.
And that
Same thing. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and that's a point that I think we can make for multiple people's work that we've seen is sometimes, there's just not enough contrast between the lettering that you want to really jump off the page because that's what's going to sell your card typically.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
I would just
total agreement.
change that up, make it a little more clear.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, I think great start. Make the lettering pop a little bit more.
One other thing that I noticed that usually feels weird to me is when people kind of use these realistic moments of like this flashing star, whatever that is over there. It kind of looks like a real lens flare versus all these things that look very flat and graphic. And when those things are combined, it just doesn't necessarily feel like it's the same space. No,
I thought it was
intended.
A photo of it.
Yeah.
I was like, wow, I think they took a flash photo. So it definitely looks very realistic, but pretty much in contrast to the beautiful illustration. So, but I love the other ones. Those feel more fitting and blend right in.
Yeah, so just try to keep that same illustration style going throughout, and then things will feel more cohesive. Great job, Christina. Moving on to Erica Freitag. Okay. Sure. This one I pulled. It's a lovely composition. Really love the colors and the way that I know you, Erica, did a couple variations of this before she ended up this color palette, and I think it's lovely. But one of the things that I noticed was kind of in keeping with the last one, wanting things to feel in the same space and cohesive. There's like this beautiful dimensional ribbon that has lots of deep shadows. But then on top of that, you have these roses that are also really nice, but they're a different vibe. It's like not matching the shadows. They're totally flat. And then the lettering again has shadows. And then this border, it kind of goes through the ribbon at certain points, but it doesn't necessarily look like it's actually casting the right amount of shadow for that. So I think in general, just being aware of the source of light that you have. If you're using shadows in one area, you should probably be using those across the whole piece just to make everything look really intentionally in the same space.
Right. And there's a difference between a drop shadow on your letter and then a drop shadow to your background. So we're seeing a lot of drop shadows on letters to give them dimension, but then there isn't really a relationship with the background. They're just sort of placed on top. So there can really be another drop shadow or some other dimension to help them feel grounded.
Okay, great, Erica. We pulled this from Jessica. We absolutely loved this piece. Jessica's killing it.
Mm-hmm.
This is super cute, and this is just a really strong composition where she has incorporated the lettering and the illustration together in a really nice way, so everything feels just very cohesive. And these are just an adorable illustration style too.
For sure. And you can see there's if you look closely, you'll notice there's a drop shadow on the letters, but it's pretty subtle. But then there's also dimension behind the letters. Yeah, there we go. There's clouds, there's stars, and it really just helps everything pop off the page.
Yeah, and there's plenty of contrast as well that helps you be able to read the letters. Sure.
It's also really hard to make lettering, not on a perfect baseline, but then make it feel totally legible and make your eye just read it, in a perfect line. And that's something that Jessica's done a really great job with and a couple of different challenges.
Yeah, it reminds me of Shauna Parmesan. She does a really good job with that as well.
Really cute.
Very playful letters. They're intentionally not perfect. And it can be hard to pull that intentionality off. For sure. But she does a great job. Okay, we're going to move on to this piece by Kimberly Crawford, Over the Moon for You. Okay, so I commented to Kimberly on the Facebook group that I noticed that she was doing some texture in the background, but it's just super subtle. And I think I kind of saw this throughout a lot of people's pieces where they have like these really cool moments of texture, but they dial them down really far back so you can't even really see it or appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I think there's a definite opportunity here in a lot of these pieces to be less afraid of the texture and incorporate it more.
Yeah. I think
that will add a lot of depth to the piece.
Yeah. It'll add a lot of depth and it'll just bring everything together. So right now I see the texture. There's a tiny bit on the lettering on one of
it's like a gradient.
There's like a gradient. And it actually looks like there might be some texture on the moon, but it's really subtle, like maybe a highlight. I see that there's a clear shadow, but I think there actually is some texture in there too. But then we have these really cute stars, but they're just sort of floating, and even adding tiny ones that surrounds them would help add far and back, just to show some dimension. And then adding it to the adorable little spaceship would be really fun too, and it would just take, I think, the piece to the next level. So not being afraid to add some more layers in.
Yeah, layers and texture, because otherwise it might tend to kind of look flat and vectory instead of like rich and textury.
Yeah, and I think when we think about these pieces, we're like, well, it'll translate different to if it's on textured paper, but we can do all that. We have the capabilities of really wowing a buyer by showing them all the opportunities there are for texture and depth. And if you think something would be really cool embossed, you can show that, and they can choose if they want to keep it as a design element or as a technical printing component.
Yeah, I mean, even in this situation for this graphic, this could look really cool embossed, like if these bigger graphic pieces were kind of popping out, like the rocket ship and the moon, and even the lettering. So, implying those kind of things can really take the piece to the next level.
For sure.
Okay, great, Kimberly. Let's move on to Krista. Okay. Oh my goddess.
Yes.
Happy birthday. Yeah, so both Alana and I have seen this as goodness.
Yeah. I think mostly because the D's are a lot less thick than the other letters. So they're just like not
Yeah.
quite consistent. However, I think the composition is quite beautiful here and it's different. With this challenge specifically, we saw a lot of people doing just a similar approach, which they all looked great, but this one is kind of stepping outside and doing something a little different, a really funky illustration, some cool letters, but it just is a bit hard to read the goddess. I think it looks more like goodness because it's so squished. So I think that's a quick fix. Make those D's look a little bit more like the rest of the letters.
And this is another situation too where the top of and the bottom of the G are kind of clipping a little bit too close here to the body of the G. So just making sure there's enough space, because the negative space is also what helps with readability. And you need to make sure there's enough breathing room so you can actually visually understand what the letter is.
Yeah. And then again, with the texture, we're starting to see some texture, which is really fun. But I think we both just think a lot of these textures could be pushed a little farther just to add some more depth.
Yep.
Cool.
Okay, let's move on to Lauren from Renin Ink. So she has done a couple of iterations of this, and it's gotten stronger, I think, as she's gone along. But one thing that we noticed that we would just love to see is these illustrations are so insanely gorgeous. The bees and the flowers are so beautiful. The lettering's great. It just, because it's all like kind of monochromatic, it feels a little more flat than it could if she introduced more colors. And this is a perfect place to do that in these flowers and in the bees. So I think that's what we would recommend to really like bring this piece alive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the illustration is so detailed and so beautiful, and it would really add some dimension and just some ways for your eye to travel around the piece by adding some depth with the color. I think it would be really beautiful. But it's made leaps and bounds already, and compositionally it's set up really beautifully. And the illustrations are stunning. So just take it one step further with color.
Yeah, and this is gorgeous lettering here. I love the way that she has interlocked these E's, especially. Really, really great job.
And the shadows make sense.
Yeah, they do.
You can tell that they're interlocked and they're not just looping each other. They're actually going behind and in front of it.
Yeah. Okay, Mackenzie Smith, you're my favorite person in the whole wild world. I think this is another example of when people are a little bit afraid of their own design, where the background is kind of dialed back maybe a little bit too much. Since the wild is kind of the wordplay here. So I think we want to make that a little bit more clear. And I think there's just an opportunity to incorporate the wild aspect of things or the cheetah print more in with the lettering, because right now they feel like two kind of different parts to me.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people are really afraid of doing something that doesn't fit their Instagram feed. And we could talk a lot about this. Maybe we'll do a separate video on it, but you can make one that doesn't fit your feed and share it in the group and put it in your portfolio. And then you could make a different version for your feed, or you could just not share it too. And that's okay. So if you want to make a card that's wild, really play up that you want it to be wild and go a little wild with your colors. So I think just bumping up the contrast would be really fun. And I think this lettering is very fun, and I like the bouncy baseline. But one thing to remember with this style, it's more calligraphy, it's brushed calligraphy. And just one thing to keep in mind is just A, legibility, and B, kerning. And so in wild, the D is pretty far off. So just bring that back in a little bit, and then try and make sure all the lettering feels balanced. And then just to be careful with N's and M, I see this a lot, is that especially when you start a downstroke and then the rest of your letter starts kind of far away, it almost looks like two letters. So if you look at the N, you'll see what I'm talking about. But then also if you're doing an M and you have one loop and then a shorter loop, a lot of buyers see that, I don't know, they just don't read it as an M. I had this happen to me like 6 times. So I know this is a pattern. So I would just be cautious, but I think the style of lettering is pretty fun, or the style of calligraphy is pretty fun. So just watch out for those two things.
Yeah, and a lot of times if I want to do something that's a little more bouncy or free, but still have like that kind of lettering aspect to it, I can start with the brush pen and
Mm-hmm.
then go in and really edit things
Yeah.
and change and have more of a lettering eye to come in at the end,
Yeah.
and you know just really like hone in on that readability. So
Yeah, absolutely.
okay, Natalia Bain, you're hella sweet, my love. Okay. Um, this I love the where she's going with the H and the S especially, and it could be kind of cool to see the Ella and the wheat be in a similar style. But I do just want to point out some of the issues in the letter form. Like, for example, the spur that's over here on the left side of the H, there should be one on the right side as well. And the spurs on the S, usually they should be kind of around the spine. So one should be like above right here and one should be below right here. So, and also the end of the S doesn't really go out in the same serif that the H does. So I think just studying this kind of type would be really beneficial. Um, you know, you don't have to be afraid to look at type when you're working. Like it's, I think Ken Barber in one of the classes that I took from him, he was like, you know, I feel like I have the easiest job in the world because people have already figured this out over hundreds of years, and I just get to, you know, pick and choose from there and like add my own spin. But people have already figured out the letter form, so don't be afraid to reference and to study. You don't want to rip off, but you
Yeah.
absolutely should learn from and study the forms.
That's what I've learned too. I used to teach typography. And so, first of all, if you guys are confused about some of these phrases that are keywords, or I don't know, I can't think of what to call them, definitions, whatever, that we're talking about, then let us know in the Facebook group or comment here or whatever. And we can talk about maybe doing a course about type 101 and pointing out where the stress of the letter is and what the spine is and what nodes are and things like that. And we'd be happy to talk about that more because we both have a traditional type background. But print out an alphabet or go pick up a vintage type book and really research the S, because your hand is not going to create what someone else's hand already made. So study it, figure out, okay, the thickness of the letter is here, the weight is here, the stress is here, the serif goes this way, you know, how do these letters work? And then make your own. So use what you learn and make your own. So, you know, this is off to a great start. We're just offering some pointers to take it a step further. And I think one other thing we wanted to point out is with the drop shadows, which I think we've talked about a little bit, but here on the your and the my love, we have this little drop shadow. And because it's really a delicate script, I think by filling in the space between the two letters, between the, yep, there you go. Thank you for that. I'm like pointing with my fingers. Nobody can see it. That would help create some more dimension. And then maybe it might be a tweak to the colors as well.
Yeah, I think you're always with licensing, you're trying to make something that's going to jump off the shelves, both to buyers who are going to even decide if they're going to put it on the shelves, and then to customers who are deciding if they're going to buy it and use the card or whatever it is. So my kind of rule of thumb is to always make the lettering just at least a little bit thicker than I think it needs to be, just so it's extra readable, extra, you know, you can see it from far away. Because right now, this your and my love, you just lose it at a distance that's, you know, if you're not right up on the,
especially for foil printing or letterpress, which is definitely an option for any of these. They can't print something too small, so we really need to think about how thick something's going to be. We may have a guest appearance coming.
Hi, Heath. Okay, Let's move to Stephanie.
Yeah, and I
Blend.
just want to say quickly, these are all amazing. We've been blown away by everyone. And so we just picked out a couple, just like a reminder, if yours is picked or if yours wasn't picked, we just picked out a couple that had common patterns that we've seen.
Yeah.
We're so impressed. And the coolest thing is everyone's looks so different. So
Yeah, that's
different with the
great.
same prompt. It's so cool. So you guys are doing great, and hopefully these little videos will help you guys and give you some tools.
Yeah, and for this one, I would say some of the letters are different sizes or kind of bouncing around on a different baseline, and it's just a little bit difficult to tell if that's intentional or accidental. So if it is intentional, I would, again, exaggerate that a little bit more so people realize that you're trying to do a more bouncy, playful style.
For sure.
And then if not, use a baseline and a cap height and keep those things super kind of visually measured out.
Yep. And one thing I was going to say is just the A and the R here don't seem to fit the style of the rest of the letters.
Yeah.
They seem really traditional, and they have this beautiful, these little beautiful feet. And the A and the R, are really tall. And they just don't seem to fit. So I'm not, like Katie said, we just weren't sure if this was something that was intentional. If you're like, I just don't know how to draw in a straight line, there are so many amazing tools. One within Procreate, you can use the grid. A grid's never cheating. It's like the best tool ever. But I think the colors are going somewhere here. It's so cool to see how you guys have all taken the colors and either added a color or changed a color, or just, seeing them in different lights is really cool. So
yeah, one thing that I would say, as far as if we're trying to focus on Valentine's Day for the mass market, some of these can even exaggerate more into those classic reds and pinks. And even though you feel like maybe you vomited red and pink on your piece, those really do scream Valentine's Day, and buyers and customers are going to be able to quickly understand the occasion that it's for, and what they're supposed to buy it for. So that's always a helpful thing when you're creating for a specific occasion.
Yeah, and I think all of these could easily be anniversary cards.
Sure.
Right. So you could do two colorways. One is Valentine's Day, which buyers are looking for red and white and pink, because that's what is on the shelves and they want it to fit. M&Ms are pink for Valentine's Day. So if you start just looking in the stores, you'll see, okay, so it needs to fit in, but I could easily change it and also make it just for anniversary. So that's really the fine line, is this is for a specific holiday versus this is just, a more general love card. And so
yeah, I like the two colorways idea.
Yeah, I think that'd be fun, especially for, like we said, if you're trying to make something match your personal style. Maybe you would never buy red and pink, but you would only buy black and white. Just do both and see how people respond to them.
Yep, great advice. Let's look at Paula Sendor Shears little love piece. So really great idea. I love where she's going with this. I would just work on the flourishes a little bit more. And she, I think in Facebook, said that she had a lot of difficulty with the flourishes. I think they're really close. You can just see the kind of shake of the hand on here. So I think just, you don't have to get these in just one shot when you're doing flourishes. You can go back and you can start with one stroke and then go back and perfect it as you go. I think
you saw my Procreate or my Photoshop or whatever, it's like 7 layers of pencil sketches and then like 1 layer of a nicer pen and then like a final layer where I go through it so slowly. So you can redraw them 100 times, or you could go over them and zoom in really close and to make them feel a little more finesse.
Yeah, and I think the same note with the lettering you can see some of the curves are just a little wonky or wobbly. And, she could just go in after the fact and just kind of fix some of those issues and make it a little smoother of transitions. And I think it would just bring this piece up to another level.
Yeah.
And one last thing I want to say about the flourishes is it doesn't read as much like a heart as it could. So if you exaggerate this dip here in the middle and have it come out a little further and then try and hit the edges with the flourishes as much as possible, you will really define that shape more clearly. And then our eye will, we can pretty much get that it's a heart, but you really want to like nail that in, make sure that that comes across.
It looks like one of the ideas here might have been to do almost everything connected. It looks like just about everything is connected, but it's also okay to just have little tiny flourishes that are much smaller. And one thing I've noticed is to think about opening strokes and exiting strokes. Are they all thin, or do they have a little ball at the end, or do they fade to a hairline? And Katie's the queen of flourishes, so her work is a good place to look at this.
Well, I think Doyle Young is the
king,
the actual king of flourishes. So look at his work and see how he does that. The one really helpful thing with flourishes that I learned from Nick Mazzani is to limit the amount of times that a flourish goes different directions. So like maybe, I think he said maybe 3 at the most, because other than that, it starts to look like crazy and wobbly, and it doesn't look as succinct and confident. So I kind of always pay attention to how many times my flourish is wrapping around. And there's obviously times where you don't have to follow these exact rules, but just kind of having that in mind will be helpful.
Yeah, I think this piece really has the potential to be very elegant, and so just pushing it a little farther. I love the symmetry, or almost symmetry, but pretty close. So can't wait to see what you think of our changes. And we've got, I think, one more.
Yeah, one more here from Wendy Fung. So I thought this was a really fun piece with the colors especially, but one thing that I noticed across the board of a lot of pieces that we were getting is some heavy hands on some drop shadows. So I wanted to kind of point that out. In art school, my professors were like very adamant for us not to use drop shadows until we felt really confident that we could use them in a nuanced way, because if you do a drop shadow that's too wide or too blurred, it can kind of look almost like a clip art kind of vibe, or it just makes it look a little more juvenile if it's not used in like a kind of nuanced way. So,
and if you think about it in the print world, if you think about it's sort of to create an illusion, and so you really want it to be quite subtle. If you think about letterpress, that creates a shadow, but it's an untrained eye wouldn't say, oh, there's a shadow there. They would just sort of be like, oh, when I touch it, it dips down. And so we're sort of using it as a tool to create an illusion that there's depth. So it really needs to be pretty minor. And I think it just takes a lot of practice. I still struggle with them, and I don't use them very often. And when I do, I print it out and look at it from far away. I look at it close up. I try it in different colors. It's definitely an art in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And this could be another good example too, as I zoom in, of things that are just a little bit too subtle, like where these letters interlock, these shadows or lines that are kind of trying to show how they interlock are a little bit too subtle. So when I zoom out, it doesn't quite work. I can't quite figure it out with my eye, like what's supposed to be happening. So that's another case of exaggerate that stuff. Remember that you're going to be viewing these from far away. So
yeah, and just one thing I was going to say about the drop shadow is I think the reason it feels harsh here is because the color doesn't necessarily make sense. because the background isn't red, there are red pieces, but it sort of should reflect, like be a darker version of what's behind it. Like it's reflecting off the background. I think I'm saying that correctly. Katie, correct me if I'm wrong. But maybe at the bottom, it should be more similar to the blue color, and maybe at the top, it should be more similar to the yellow. So it sort of becomes
Yeah.
a layer in between. And so
And
the
that
red
would
just
happen if you set this to multiply,
Yes.
and dialed the opacity back a little bit more.
And if you guys don't know how to do these things in Procreate, we can do tutorials and show you guys. We just need to know what you don't know. But I will say this feathering in the background, it's so soft. Like I want to touch it. It looks
Yeah.
really fun. And so it's really cool. And I think having that slight change in the color would really, really help this piece.
Yeah. And so great job, everybody. We'll wrap this
Yeah.
up now. Thank you for posting such great work. We're
Yeah, let
excited
us
to
know.
see people engaging with each other and helping
For sure.
each other.
Let
push
us
their
know if you guys
pieces.
want us to do this again, or maybe if you want to submit pieces for review or something like that. And we can figure out the best way to give you guys some feedback.
Yeah, thanks so much, and we'll see you guys in class.
Bye.